One of the topics I get asked about all the time regarding nightscape photography is, do I use a star tracker to shoot? And if I do, how would I go about it? Well, that question leads to a whole lot of further factors that I think need to be addressed to get to the bottom of the issue. I guess the first thing to discuss is, what is a star tracker and why would anyone choose to use one? So let's start there. Now, as you may know, the Earth is rotating on its axis and does one complete revolution every 24 hours or so. This relates to about 15 degrees per hour. So if we go outside at night and look up to the stars, we soon realise they appear to be slowly moving across the sky. Now, you can't see that movement initially, but if you come back out, I don't know, maybe an hour or so later, you'll immediately notice that the stars are in a different spot in the sky. Now, of course, the stars are not moving, but the movement of the Earth itself gives us that impression. So, if we decide to photograph the stars, we need to limit our camera's shutter speed, as the stars will eventually start to trail and not be sharp dots. And you can see an exaggerated example of this in star trail images. So, what does the star tracker do? Well, by aligning the device to point in the sky, to that point around which all the stars rotate, we have the ability to track the stars and stop the trailing when using longer exposures. So by doing this, we can get very clean and noise-free images by setting lower ISOs and longer shutter speeds. It's effectively opening up the full benefits of the exposure triangle to us again. Aperture, shutter speed and ISO can all be adjusted to whatever we determine to be the appropriate settings. Okay, so why doesn't everyone use a star tracker? Well, I'd suggest that many people will have their own answer to that question. Some may actually find them expensive, although, to be honest, they've never been cheaper than what they are today. Now, some will say they already have enough gadgets to carry around on a night shoot. And while I guess others struggle with the technical side of setting them up and aligning them to the correct orientation. Now, to be honest, I can relate to all these opinions, and like most things, it's a matter of weighing up the benefits against the downside of using these trackers. For me, however, there is one major drawback to using a star tracker. The longer you track the stars, the more blurry the foreground part of the image will become. You see, the ground isn't moving along with the tracker, so it won't be sharp in your images. And this is where I have the most problems with trackers. To shoot nightscapes, that is, images that feature both the stars and the landscape, you have to take more than one image and blend them together to make everything nice and sharp. Now, I don't know about you, but for me this makes a tracker less suitable for certain shooting conditions. Anything with a complex mix of foreground subjects intersecting into the sky, things like trees, massively complicate the post-processing of these shots. High-level Photoshop skills become just as important as anything else. Okay, now what I'd like to do is take this right back to the planning and the shooting stage. I've recently taken a number of tracked sky shots and I accepted the challenge of finding compositions to blend these into. Now, I do want to stress that this isn't my normal style of shooting nightscapes, but it is quite a fascinating process. So, firstly, I'm going to run through what equipment I used and what I was thinking when I set it all up out in the field. So at this point, I'd like to bring you out here to show you exactly where I took these shots and how I set up just out here in this location. So here we go. This is how I set up. I got my tripod with my tracker out here, middle of nowhere. Gorgeous location this. I've shot here a few times, but over there you'll see it's a very wide open expanse and nothing much in the foreground here to interrupt my sky. So you can see here, completely open background, nothing to interrupt the view. There's a windmill just here, which you will possibly see in one of the shots that I took here, which was one of the wider panos. But essentially what I was looking for was just a wide open spaces so I could shoot the background sky. Now sometimes when you're on location, you don't have that benefit. In other words, the subject that you're shooting, it could be hills, mountains, trees, whatever, interrupts the sky. And of course, you can't get that broad sky without the interruptions. And a lot of you will say, well, that's how it is, that's how it should be shot. No worries, you can try shooting it that way, but then you've got to somehow get rid of the foreground subjects, which will be blurred, remember, because the tracker is constantly moving. So this is why I suggest coming to somewhere like this, get a nice open clear sky and shoot your sky there. The other option, of course, is to where you are. Say, for example, you want to shoot the windmill in the foreground over there. Well, you could line up your original shot for the foreground for that, but just move over here a little bit, just away from the windmill to capture the sky. Now, the sky's not going to change just because you move 20 or 30 meters away from your foreground subject matter. The sky will look exactly the same here. It's huge. It spreads right across from one horizon to the other here, the way that I shot it the other night. And I love these spots anyway. I can spend all night out here just marveling at the beauty of the night sky. Okay, so the tracker I'm using here is the Skywatcher Star Adventurer. It's probably about 5 years old. It's probably one of their older models. But anyway, it's quite a solid unit. Now that leads me to its mounting option. And I think the mounting for your tracker is really, really important. So I've got this on a huge, big tripod here. You can see it's way bigger than it needs to be for a normal camera, but this is an old video tripod that I had. But it's got a couple of features that I like. Firstly, it's really solid, so it's rock steady. So if I've got it out there and I'm doing a long exposure, because remember, these are quite long exposures, and if there's any wind or any breeze at all, you don't want your tripod wobbling or anything like that. So a big, heavy tripod is good. Now, of course, this works against us if we want to go hiking or we want to take our tracker with us up on top of a mountain somewhere. I've never done that because there's no way, no one I'm going to take this with me. Even the Star Adventure itself is just too heavy to put in my backpack. I realise there are smaller, lighter weight options out there, so have a look at them. But anyway, I'm just talking about with the kit that I've got here. So very solid tripod, which is really important. Now the basics of a star tracker go like this. This is where we polar align. Let me just take the camera off for a minute. And this part of the tracker here, we want to point that to either the North Pole or the South Celestial Pole. Now, the big question is, how do we find that? Well, I've outlined my rough method, but essentially what we do, we turn the device either this way in, as they call an azimuth. It goes around this way, essentially from north to south to east to west. And then the altitude, which is this way, we can go up in degrees. Now, the way it works is, all you do is you look at your latitude on a map. So where I live here is about 37 degrees south in the southern hemisphere. So all I need to do is point this 37 degrees up into the sky to the south, so in the southern direction, and I find the South Celestial Pole. Now, as I said, you use programs like Stellarium. It will show all of this in really simple graphical form, and it works really well. That's all you have to do. But the thing that is really important is to make sure the base is actually level. So you can't have it wobbling off on funny angles, because if you do that, the tracking will get out of alignment. So this particular tripod has a spirit bubble level, and you can see it there. And all I do is I eyeball that bubble and get it in the center. And a lot of tripods have a bubble. Some are more or less accurate, but anyway, the way I'm doing it, and it really works well because I've got this adjustable tripod which has a bowl. So you can move, by loosening this here, you can move it around in any direction, and that makes it really easy to line this little bubble up exactly where I want it to be. And so because of that, I don't need to worry about doing anything special about the tripod legs. I can just leave them where they are, nice and firmly done up. And I just use this bowl leveling head to do my adjustments. And that does save an awful lot of pain, I can tell you. Okay, so if you look here, you'll see one of the most important parts of these mounts, and that is the scale that gives you the vertical alignment. And as I said before, I set mine to about 37 degrees. So that's the angle it's pointing up into the night sky. And as I mentioned before, if you look at Stellarium or similar programs, it will give you the exact reference of where that looks in the night sky. You can just look on Google Maps to find your latitude. Okay, so now that we know the theory behind these trackers, let's see how that pans out in practice. The thing I want to make clear to you is that I generally use pretty wide angle lenses, as you can see, up to about 50mm focal length on the tracker. Because of that, the polar alignment is very forgiving and you can be roughly aligned and still get pretty good results. So with that in mind, I'll show you my rough polar alignment method for the southern hemisphere. And look, by the way, if you're in the northern hemisphere, then just point your tracker at Polaris in the northern sky and you'll be okay with these wide angle lenses. Here in the south, we don't have any bright stars near the celestial pole. So my method is as follows. Firstly, I'll locate the Southern Cross. Sometimes it's high in the sky or it might be low down, depending on what time of year it is. Now, you'll also see the two bright stars called Alpha and Beta Centauri. These are known as the pointers, as they point to the Southern Cross. Now, if you draw an imaginary line from the closest of these pointers to the Southern Cross across the sky to another bright star called Achernar, then extend the length of the Southern Cross 4 times, where those two lines intersect is where the celestial pole is. Now, this is pretty rough, and I certainly admit that. But when working with wide-angle lenses, I've found this to be pretty good, and I've actually shot quite successfully up to about 85mm focal length using this method. I want you to hear me loud and clear here though. I am not setting myself up as an expert when it comes to using trackers, and I don't delve into deep space photography where polar alignment accuracy is paramount. If you want to learn more about the details of such things, I would highly recommend Peter Zelenka's channel here on YouTube. He has some great videos regarding star trackers and indeed deep space photography, as well as Peter. Look, I'd suggest Trevor from Astro Backyard, who has awesome content featuring deep sky photographic techniques and equipment. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of others out there, but I follow both these guys myself. So if you have a look at the desktop program called Stellarium, you can get a really good visualization of what the sky looks like before you go out. And as well as that, there are plenty of great apps where you can point your phone up into the night sky to see where these stars are located whilst out there in the field. Now, when it comes to the actual tracker itself, once I've got that spirit level set and I know my angles are right, I've looked at my orientation in the sky and I reckon I've got it polar aligned, all I need to do is then get my camera mounted. I'm just using this with a ball head. Now, I know there are other more elaborate mountings with counterweights. I actually bought that whole kit with the counterweight, and with this particular tracker, when I put the counterweight and the camera on, the whole thing ground to a halt. It just wouldn't work properly. It never really has, so I don't bother with the counterweight. I just use a ball head. I know that limits a few things. Also makes it impossible to use the built-in polar alignment device that's built in, but forget about that. If you really want to know how to set these things up, go to Peter Zelenka's YouTube channel. He's got some awesome videos on it, but I'll just quickly run you through it, what I do. So you can adjust these things here to get roughly the ball head into position you want, do the normal settings. So I'll grab my camera. I've got a Manfrotto plate on my thing, so I can just quickly put it on like that. I can make my adjustments like I normally would with the ball head. As you can see, I can loosen up those things. Now, where this becomes quite difficult though, and I found this the other night, is when I was shooting panoramas. Because using a ball head like this and trying to get panos, now I was shooting in the western sky. So if you can imagine, this is facing south up that way, so I've got to shoot that way. So I'm trying to get the ball head so that I've got that little slot in the right place to get my camera to angle up, and of course it starts fouling somewhere. So I had to fight with it a little bit, and this goes to the problems that you'll have setting up these things. They're not as simple as they sound. Now, a lot of people will use panorama heads and all sorts of funny attachments on this, but by the time you add all of these things onto this tracker, the thing's about 3 times heavier than it starts off. So it's never as simple as it seems. Now you can see here I've got my Yongnuo RF603 remote controls. These are wireless triggers. I've got the receiver here hooked in, just hanging over there, plugged into the remote socket. Because again, the last thing you want to be doing is too much handling of these things to press the trigger or the shutter when it's operating. So you can see when you turn the dial on there, it starts to go into polar mode. It's spinning at a very, very low level, and I don't want to touch anything. So I'm using these wireless remotes, and I'll put my camera, this is on the Nikon camera, I can put it into time mode. So the set-in shutter speed on this is maximum of 30 seconds. If I want to shoot longer than 30 seconds, I've got to either use bulb mode, and if I use bulb mode, that means I need an intervalometer to plug in so that I can keep the shutter open. But on these Nikons, they have what is known as time mode, and that's awesome. I press the button once, it opens the shutter, and I can leave it going as long as I want, and then I can press the button one more time and it closes the shutter, and that's awesome. The only downside I would say to that is there's no counter, so I actually have to have some other device or just count myself. So the other night I was doing 60-second shutter speeds, which were working really well, and this method worked fine. Now sure, there might have been a few that were 58, a few that were 62 or whatever, because my counting mightn't be totally accurate, but basically that's how I got it to work, and yeah, I didn't have to touch the camera. It was really awesome. Okay, so now that we've done all this, we're ready to shoot. You can see how much longer it takes to set up compared to a normal fixed tripod shoot. And this is obviously a factor in the whole situation for a lot of people. So a little while ago, I went out to a dark and flat location with the express aim of shooting some tracked sky shots. I used a 20mm, 35mm and 50mm focal length lenses on my Nikon Z6. Now, one of the things I did was to shoot some panoramas because I knew I'd be needing to blend these into some panos I'd already taken. And you can see here that I did okay, but it was pretty time consuming. Look, I was using 60-second shutter speeds for most of these, and some are stacked using multiple shots as well. However, the quality is stunning, and this is the number one reason people go to the trouble of using trackers to shoot the night sky. You'll notice that none of these images really feature much foreground, and this is because I knew I was going to blend in a different foreground to get my final shots, so I needed as much clear sky space as possible for the blending and edits to work. Now, many of you are going to be sitting there thinking this isn't real photography, it's all about post-processing. Well, you know, I actually totally agree with you. From a purely ethical perspective, images that are constructed this way can be very misleading and quite harmful to those who are learning nightscape photography and wonder why they can't get shots like this when they go out to shoot. And that's why we need to be upfront about the methods we use when capturing our nightscapes. If it's not a single image, then we need to say so. If we use a tracker, we need to say that. Same with stacking, light painting, and everything else, to be honest. Nightscapes, are a very steep learning curve, and we need to provide help to those starting out so they don't lose their enthusiasm and their passion for the craft. Now, having said all of that, I truly believe that photography at its core is an artistic expression of what the artist wants the viewer to see. The use of incredibly high quality tracked images can be so spectacular and enthralling that people gasp in amazement. And plenty of people couldn't care less about how the images are captured. All they want to do is marvel at them. So the argument rages across the photographic community, and there is considerable division about this topic. I mean, we certainly can't solve that problem here, but I did feel compelled to put it out there to you guys. So let's move on. Look, the tracker itself is a tool, just like the tripod or the lens. And the trick is to know how these tools can be used to integrate them into our workflow so we get the desired results. Now, once I had the tracked images, I went looking through my library to see what foregrounds could be used to blend these into. I actually have hundreds of nightscape images, but not all of them suited the skies I'd captured. Either they had too much foreground distraction or they were oriented the wrong way. But I did find a few that I wanted to use, and you can see here the ones I chose. I'll include the original shot so you can get a feel for how they actually differ. You'll see that many of these have the Milky Way in a position that could never happen in real life. Now, if I was going to do this on a regular basis, I would make sure these situations didn't occur. Look, I reckon that comes into the deception category I mentioned earlier. But I choose images for this video based on what I felt comfortable blending in Photoshop. And as I said before, you need exceptional Photoshop post-processing skills to master these types of images, and I don't profess to have those skills. Photography and graphic design are two completely different skill sets, and often they take years to combine successfully into our artistic and creative workflow. Now, I went for fairly clean horizon images without large trees and branches, which would make them harder to blend. And look, the other thing to consider is that by using two images, often from different locations, it can be difficult to make the blending look realistic. Things like, I guess, air glow or even light pollution may well contribute to a final image, and we need to try our best to simulate those same conditions. Now, once again, this is where the Photoshop skills come into it. Seems to be a common theme there, doesn't it? Look, ideally, you'd like to think that both the sky tracked images and the foreground could be shot from the same location at the same time. But in reality, this is often not done, simply because it's a lot easier to find clean and clear sky somewhere else to do the tracking shots. Now, one of the really interesting and I guess somewhat dreamy compositions is when you combine different focal length lenses for the foreground and background, as I have done here on a few of these shots. Now, I like the final results, but I stress how important it is to tell people that this is the case up front. So, there you have it, tracked sky images blended with non-tracked foreground images. Together they make for a very enchanting picture, and to be absolutely honest, the sky is literally the limit when adopting these principles. So, what would be my preferred method of shooting nightscape images? Well, I have to say that stacking multiple images and blending with the same foreground from a fixed tripod position is my choice. It's just a lot easier to shoot in the field, and the post-processing is much more straightforward as well. I'm really happy with the results I've been getting with that method for, well, quite a few years now. Certainly by tracking, stacking and blending, you'll get the highest possible quality, but that comes at a considerable cost to time, equipment requirements and post-processing abilities, not to mention carrying lots more gear on those long hikes through the wilderness in the middle of the night. Now look, of course, with greater technology comes greater possibilities, and I don't ever want to limit our creativity. If you're willing to learn new skills and you want to put the time in, you'll get excellent results by tracking the night sky. Anyway, look, I'm always really interested in your thoughts, and comments are welcome down below. Look, thanks again for tuning into the channel. I really do appreciate that you do, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. See you then.